something like what Shiro just said. I just want to say I think Chris would have liked us to remember the words of the executed Rob Joe Hill, don't go and organise. He'd been insisting, he gave his life to building a party, to writing and do many things he would want us to carry on. And therefore, we are going to carry on. Because it's the only fitting tribute there is. Karl Marx once wrote that the class struggle is a constant in our society. Sometimes, however, it goes underground and it burns subterraneously. Sometimes it's open. Sometimes it's obvious to anyone there is a class struggle in society. And actually, if you think about the last 30 years in Britain and how Britain looks in 2009, we have been shaped by a vicious class struggle in which, unfortunately, for most of that time, we've been on the losing side. Britain has the longest working hours in Western Europe. We have the fewest holidays. We have some of the lowest and the highest levels of child poverty in any Western European society. Child poverty is going up again. It's increasing all the time. Of the 3 million children in this country who are in poverty, it's not as a result of the parents in the overwhelming case of being unemployed. In the majority of cases, the parents are in work. It's as a result of low wages which blight their lives. You know, the reality of working lives. You know, the amount of unpaid overtime that people now work in this country. I know it's increasingly, when I talk about this, actually people come up with cases all the time. Just the level of bullying, I'm going to come back to this at the moment, in work. The spread of managers into every aspect of the working process and associated with that bullying. And we know as well that this economic crisis, a crisis which no one can argue that we caused. 30 years ago, you might have argued, you'd have been wrong, but you might have argued, greedy workers, their wage rises caused the crisis, or the trade unions were too powerful. No one can argue that today. People know it was a crisis caused by the bankers, the speculators, and the people in the corporate headquarters. They know that, right? But we also know, and I think increasingly people know that they are going to demand that having thrown billions of pounds to bail out the banks, and to continually do it. I mean, this thing called quantitative easing, which is just printing money, actually they're giving it to the banks. That's all they're doing, and the banks are driving up their share price to get more money in an asset bubble. I mean, why? I don't know. You know, I mean, the banks aren't actually lending money, not just to you or me, but they're not only lending money to business, right? But they keep throwing money at these people, and people know they're going to expect us to pay. Now, Gordon Brown's speech yesterday, the Law by the Queen, doesn't mean a whole tin of beans, because he's not going to be Prime Minister for very long. This is a dead government. It is waiting for someone to inter it. But the next government, and it's likely to be David Cameron, is going to demand we pay. We have to pay for a public spending deficit, which has nothing to do with us, right? And we're going to have to pay. And I think people know this. I'm going to give you an instance. It may come as a surprise, but there's one decent thing this Labour government has done. There's only one I can think of, and I don't know if people can name it. It's called Sure Stop. And it's going to go. It's going to go. It's the only bloody decent thing this government's done, and George Osborne will get rid of it if he's Chancellor of the Exchequer next autumn in order to pay for the bailouts for the bankers. And what they're talking about is actually fairly horrendous. And it doesn't really matter if Gordon Brown, by some miracle, got back in. They're going to do this as well, so it doesn't make any difference. But they're already talking about increasing the retirement age by a year. And some people in big business, in corporate Britain, are talking about increasing the retirement age to 70. They're already talking. For instance, David Cameron has said he will abolish health and safety executive checks. There's very few people now get checks. I mean, there's a tiny number of inspectors, but what legislation there is will effectively be completely nullified. And the same people who want to increase the retirement age to 70 want to abolish it altogether. This is pushing stuff back, by the way, not back to as it was before the 1945 Labour government. This is pushing back things back before the days of Asquith and Lord George, before the years of the First World War. They are pushing and pushing. And we know they're going to keep coming. They're going to keep coming in terms of people's jobs. The reality of employment, the number of part-time workers is increasing as a result of this recession. The number of pensioners working past the current retirement age is increasing. The number of people I meet who no longer have full-time contracts. I was talking to a teacher. I know there's a lot of people doing days here and days there in teacher. She points out she now meets people in teaching who get paid for one class. Right? These are, casual workers, and casualisation is an issue in the post dispute. It's an issue in the British Airways. They're going to keep coming. They will keep coming, and they'll keep coming. And the lesson of the last 30 years is if we give in, they'll just keep coming for more. And I think that is something that Marx, when he looked at Britain in 2009, I think he'd recognise Britain. I think he'd recognise Britain that remains a class-riven society. And it's not talked about in these terms. It's not been talked about for 30 years. Officially, we're told that class doesn't really matter. This is one of the mantras of New Labour. But it's a deeply class-ridden society, where the gap between the rich and poor has been accentuated all the time. You might have thought there'd be some humility with the rich in terms of this recession. But actually, you pick up the newspapers and they're celebrating the fact that property prices are rising. And the property prices they're talking about are houses in the millions in West London and Central London. They are talking about the number of rich people coming here. I just happened to pick up an interview with explaining that as a result of some tax fiddle that Berlusconi's allowed, which means Italians can repatriate money they've salted away overseas, that far from actually them bringing it back to Italy, they're buying houses in Kensington and Chelsea. So it's a far cry, I know, from Bethnal Green, but I don't see how we can get any more foreign yuppies into Kensington and Chelsea. They're tripping over the place. Russians, French, Italians, they're all there. Just get the Northern Line out to Notting Hill and see who gets on in the morning. They're all here because of the low level of tax compared to it, and the money they can coin in comparison to being in France and France and so on. That's the reality of corporate Britain in 2009. And I think Marx would also recognise something else. There's a thing which should be the most thing we would celebrate and enjoy in our lives. There is something that should give us a sense of purpose. There is something that should give us a work of being in comradeship, of working in coordination with people, having a sense of achievement, which should give us a sense of real joy in our lives. But instead of any of that, it's the thing that hangs over our lives like a dark cloud. It's called work. And actually, let's be honest about it, for those who've been around a bit longer, work is bloody more miserable than it was 30 years ago. It is absolutely more miserable. When you read in the post-dispute, which should have been a victory, and the unions grabbed a squalid settlement as soon as they could rather than winning a smashing victory, which is on the cards as the strike was gaining strength, gaining popularity. But one of the issues in the post-dispute was this issue of bullying. And every time it comes up, and I mention it in a meeting, actually people start going on, well, that's what happens in my workplace. These young, jumped up little, and excuse my language, but I'm not going to say it, right? Bossing about people often older than them, humiliating them, and that's what the agenda is, a humiliation. Someone said yesterday they came across someone who worked at a janitorial job who was told off for talking on the job. Now you might think a janitor might be one part of the job. He had 15 minutes docked out of his pay packet for talking. I mean, it's the reality of what work is something that Marx said. This is what he called alienation. It's not just a sense of being pissed off with things. It's a thing that we have to do. We have no control over. We have to do it. And it dominates our bloody lives. It's a nightmare hanging over us increasingly for more and more people. There are fewer people, if any, who get up with any of the things I just said about work as a sense of achievement, a sense of celebration, of cooperation, a sense of joy. No, none of that. All of it is missing from work. And actually, when I talked about the class struggle at the start, I think this is where it comes in. A year ago, well over a year ago, going into this recession, and the bailouts of the bankers created a real sense of them and us. Not just in this country, but across the board.